At the Global Liver Institute, we believe it all starts with a patient. So what happens when a patient, a liver patient no less, one of the 500 million people living with conditions that often go undiagnosed, untreated, or misdiagnosed, mistreated, and stigmatized, brings the challenges of liver patients front and center? And what happens when a patient then leads a discussion with world experts in policy, research, clinical care, and wellness on ways to overcome these challenges? Let's find out today on GLI Live. Hello and welcome. And I'm still saying Happy New Year to people. So Happy New Year and welcome to this episode of GLI Live. I'm Donna Cryer, your host. I also want to send a special shout out this week to the sorors of Delta Sigma Theta. So I wear my crimson and cream, my pearls for my sorors. So with that, though, I would like to welcome my guest for today, Dr. Julio Gutierrez, who is a renowned hepatologist at Scripps Health, but also VP of Research and Clinical Studies for ProSciento. And so for our conversation, hopefully the first of many, on the experience of Hispanic patients with liver disease. Welcome, Dr. Gutierrez.
Thank you so much, Donna, for having me today. It's a real pleasure to have the chance to speak with you.
Fantastic. And, we have, had wonderful conversations on PBC and race that have, apparently echoed throughout the Metaverse, I guess, is what we're calling it these days. And so I'm really excited that we could continue this partnership and conversation because, as you know, one conversation does not a movement make or a change in clinical practice or outcomes for people. And so I'm really grateful for this conversation today to go a little more in depth. I wanted to start with, I realize that there are very few doctors, physicians, MDs in the United States who are people of color and particularly of Hispanic descent. And so tell people how you found your path to medicine and hepatology in particular. It can inspire so many.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Donna. Yeah, I mean, it's a real problem in our country. About 4% of physicians will be from underrepresented minorities. So it's a tiny fraction. And then, on the flip side of that, we have some conditions which occur predominantly in these populations, so that you can see real disparities in the care that can be provided to these. And liver disease is really a classic example of that, where, for instance, in the state of California, more than half of people who get a liver transplant will be of Hispanic background. And we know that it probably should be something more like 70 to 80% of the patients in our state should be getting a liver transplant of Hispanic background, but many of them won't have access to transplant for various reasons. So you see these types of disparities, and then there's also been studies that have shown the clear benefit of having physicians of those underrepresented minorities in terms of healthcare outcomes. So we know there is a clear benefit. I was very lucky. I was very lucky to have been inspired first by my father, who studied at UC Berkeley, had a master's in public health, and was an optometrist. He was very involved in the early movement. And he inspired me to a career in medicine. And I was also very lucky to have been sent to Mount Sinai and New York City to start my career after I graduated from UC Berkeley and before I started medical school. And the first medical condition I studied was PBC, and the second one was Hep C. So I was a hepatologist before I even went to medical school. I was already sure I wanted to do that. In fact, I was disappointed to find out that I had to become a gastroenterologist before I could become a hepatologist. And I still loathe my gastroenterology duties compared to the passion I feel for hepatology. But so I've been very lucky, and I've taken that luck and I've tried to spread it to many mentees over my career. I'm also very passionate about trying to find new young people who could become physicians. And I'll tell you, Donna, throughout my career, my eyes have been open to the changes and the differences around the country. In California, I'm very accustomed to seeing all the steps along the way, people oftentimes not being underrepresented minorities, the college students, the medical students, the residents, the fellows, the attendings, the high executives. And then I went to Miami and San Antonio, Texas, and it's the complete opposite. You see every step of the way that there's Latinos, other people of color all along the way. So it varies around the country. We're at different stages of incorporation of these values around the country. It's very interesting to me to have had that experience, to see how different the country is with respects to this.
I was having a similar conversation earlier today about growing up in Connecticut and coming to Washington, D.C. For law school. And all of a sudden, there are Black judges everywhere and Black lawyers everywhere. And it wasn't even a thing. And so, I think both experiences are helpful to be able to be anchored and supported in culture. But also to be able to navigate and to encourage understanding and allyship amongst those who are not from minority communities, because we need both. But the part about concordant care and just understanding, sort of the cultural context of a patient and the relief often that patients experience in finding a physician who does understand their culture or speak their language, understands and can make recommendations that are relevant and can resonate. Whenever I hear physicians who are like, and I tell my patients, and no rice and no tortillas and no whatever, I'm like, I don't know what you think people are going to eat. and so I'm like, hey, let's work, give something that people can work with, because you've just, they've just written you off. My father had congestive heart failure, and I remember reconstructing his diet, and the moment that I said, and you can put Frank's hot sauce on everything because it's a low sodium food and it has no calories, and he was like, I'm in. That was the case. So finding those points of commonality and culture can really help a patient be more open and be more adherent and help facilitate that relationship. And so how do you help your fellow physicians, maybe who do not come from that background, have those productive conversations and create points of understanding with their patients as they're discussing liver disease?
That's a great question. I think that one thing that we did this year was we created a CME online that lets physicians learn about the complexities of liver disease amongst Latinos, including understanding that there's genetic risks for liver disease amongst this population. I think that for many years, we believe that liver disease and diabetes occurred in Latinos more frequently because of behavioral issues, their diet, potentially their use of alcohol, their compliance. And in 2004, we did a very special study called the Dallas Heart Study. And it revealed that all the ethnic variation in the presence of fatty liver disease could be explained by a single nucleotide polymorphism called PNPLA3. I like to call this one Pineapple 3, Donna. Okay?
That's much easier to pronounce.
As soon as I say Pineapple 3, my patients' eyes light up and they know what a pineapple is. And if a patient got a copy of Pineapple 3 from mommy and a Pineapple 3 from daddy, that had almost triple the risk of fatty liver disease. And if they had just a single copy, there still was an increased risk of fatty liver disease. And what we saw is that the presence of this allele was much less frequent in African Americans, intermediate in Caucasians, and highest in Hispanics. And again, explaining all the ethnic difference between these populations. You could take the lens off race and then put on the lens of genetics and actually have a better idea of who is going to develop fatty liver disease. Unfortunately, this discovery went pretty much undiscussed for the next 15 years as we explored different drugs for fatty liver disease that have sequentially failed. And now we have a new approach to fatty liver disease. You're going to see this over the next year emerge, Donna, that we're making drugs specifically designed for PNPLA3 using small inhibitory RNA. And what this would do is silence that gene in those folks who have that abnormal allele. This is really exciting because even though Latinos make up 17% of the population of the US and probably make up 50% of those who have fatty liver disease, on average, they were making up 5 to 10% of clinical trials. So all the clinical trials that have pretty much been done up to this point have had been underrepresented, especially in Latinos, who, by the way, have this special gene for fatty liver disease, making it even a more specific population. So what's very exciting about the new studies for PNPLA3 is they must include large segments of Hispanics because Hispanics carry this gene. So there will be a very different approach to recruitment and enrollment now in fatty liver disease that we're going to be required to go after these special populations. And I think I'm super excited about it because I think it's very important that we understand fatty liver disease amongst Hispanics because it is the #2 differential killer in Hispanics. And that is to say that Hispanics actually enjoy something called the Hispanic paradox. And that is that even though you think Hispanics may die at a younger age than their Caucasian counterparts, they actually outlive them by about 2 years. And that's why they consider it a paradox. And specifically, they beat Caucasians in 12 out of the top 15 categories of death. But where they lose is number one, diabetes. They're 70% more likely to die of diabetes. Number two, liver disease. They're 50 to 60% more likely to die of liver disease. And number three is homicide. So those are the top killers, differential killers in Latinos. And so and we know really the deep connection between diabetes and liver disease. We know that connection. So there's so much overlap right there. So a lot of focus in the community needs to be on that. And I think if folks can plug in with the CME that we produce, learn a lot, how to discuss this with their patients, how to take that blame away from the patient, let them understand, hey, this is a genetic thing. Not only is this your disease, this is your family's disease.
Right. You know, when I first learned of PNPLA3, and I do love rather going in for pineapple, but being married to a geneticist, I have to. And that, you know, we immediately wanted to tell the world about it. I remember that paper coming out and reading it and knowing that the National Hispanic Medical Association, who'd been a member of our NASH Council from the very beginning, was going to be having a congressional briefing on heart disease. And I was like, could we insert some information in your congressional briefing about this connection and this, genetic, elevated risk factor for fatty liver disease? And they were kind enough to say yes. And so we have a, longstanding history of wanting to, bridge this informational gap and let people know that this is something that should be on their radar screen. They should be asking their doctors about, their plan for their liver as well as their plan for their diabetes and their cardiovascular health as well. And I think that if people are thought about holistically in whatever care setting, and have their cardiovascular risk, their risk for diabetes, and their risk for liver disease, all controlled, then people's overall health could be vastly improved. And I think it's a it should be able to be clinically efficient, to be able to no matter what sort of doorway a patient comes through from a metabolic perspective, to make sure that all of the risk factors are controlled.
Absolutely, Don. I think this is the future because in many patients, the liver will just be the canary in the coal mine and sending signals. Look, there's cardiovascular death is coming. Metabolic disease is not right. So yes, I completely agree. It needs to be part of the approach, but oftentimes it's the first signal.
Yes. So I want to go back to the clinical research piece as well. So I think looking at diversity in clinical research from a genetic perspective makes it easier, it seems, for biostatisticians and others to understand. Does it hold true when you talk about sort of global trials? And is this a way to ensure that there is diversity across trials that aren't just done in the U.S., but also perhaps through Latin America and other countries, to make sure that they're enriched with populations that would be helpful and valid in the end to the real world application?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, as we get further along and more specific and personalized with our drug therapy, it's going to be a necessity. If you want to target a certain segment, there may be genetic markers that will guide that. And I think that's been one of the pitfalls of studying fatty liver disease, is it's always been acknowledged this is going to be a disease of heterogeneity.
Mm-hmm.
We're not curing hepatitis C, a single viral genome that we know exactly what we're after. Here's a direct acting antivirals that will get it. No, this is a more complex disease with different risk factors. And in fact, what we learned from the liver conference is PNPLA3 is still very important, but they're identifying over 75 different single nucleotide polymorphisms that may be associated with, the occurrence of fatty liver disease. PNPLA3 is interesting also too, because it varies widely amongst people of Hispanic background. We see very high rates amongst indigenous Mexicans, for example. And those are people probably of Mayan ancestry. Mm-hmm. Whereas very low rates of people, for example, for the Dominican Republic, as low as 17% compared to maybe 70 or 80%. So even amongst Hispanics, there's going to be this diversity in genetic causes and of liver disease. And so I think it will be very important to have people like your husband who can explain to us, which direction we should go with these genes, and then the interplay between them. And so we're going to need to understand this more and more in the future. And, when I tell my patients about the opportunity to be tested for PNPLA3, they're excited. They want to be tested, which I've found very interesting. They want to know more, and they feel this relief, that it's not just their fault, that there is something more to their story than they're a bad eater. So, I mean, I think it's a relief in some ways, and especially if there's going to be therapies associated with these genetic changes between the world's people, I think it will be important.
I think that's a really important story to tell about how eager people are for personalized diagnostics. I served on the board of the Personalized Medicine Coalition, and there had been an initial assumption of the reluctance of certain population to have genetic testing, but I think what we've shown over the course of years is that people want to know about themselves. They want to know about their own health. They want to understand their risks for things, and they want to do something about it if they can. And so people can be trusted with information about themselves. I think is an essential principle. Is there a gap though in educational materials, in Spanish to talk about, genetics and, genetic testing and, the differences between, types of, genetic markers, the difference between saying that you have an elevated risk for something versus saying that, you have a gene that will mean that you definitely get something. Is there an opportunity to create some in language and culture material just around this context of genetic and personalized information?
I think there is really no limit to what we can do to make efforts to, include not only Spanish languages but other languages, so people of these backgrounds can get more information. And one really exciting project I worked on the last few years was with AbbVie, and AbbVie did the real first direct-to-consumer marketing campaign for Hispanics for their hepatitis C medication. At the time, AMC was doing about $50 million a year in pharmaceutical advertising. At the same time, which was about 4 years ago, Univision was doing $0 in pharmaceutical advertising. I mean, AMC, who's watching AMC to find out about which medication they can take? Zombie channel, I think, right? So, and really, what we find is when we look at channels like Univision, is that there's a strong, population of healthcare consumers that use that channel to get a lot of information.
Absolutely.
So what we did is we made culturally appropriate in Spanish language advertising for the hepatitis C medication that AbbVie had. And they did see a dramatic uptick. And that's important because it looks like Latinos have about 2 to 3 times the risk of hepatitis C. So it's a great segment for them to go after. It benefits the population that they're increasing awareness of the liver disease. Just like the other population that watched CNN got to see so many commercials for hepatitis C therapies. Right. So, we see clear benefits of direct-to-consumer, informational material. We see that too. This last year with ProSciento, we run a national screening campaign for fatty liver disease, and we were seeing a challenge with many of our Latino patients understanding the liver biopsy procedure. So we made a Spanish language liver biopsy video, and we've seen dramatic improvement in the patient's understanding and willingness to participate in the clinical trials. So it's definitely a important part of the clinical trial program right now.
You had absolutely anticipated my next question after talking about sort of comfort levels with genetic testing, comfort levels with biopsy, and so I'd love to learn more about what the Hispanic patient perception was about liver biopsy sort of coming in, and then after reading your materials and having your conversations, then what was sort of the turning point or what helped them become more comfortable or shift?
Well, I think that any person of any color hears the word biopsy and their ears perk up, and some people have they're very concerned about getting a biopsy.
When you see the needle.
Before they even see the needle, just the idea of getting a biopsy. And the reality is the liver biopsy, of all the biopsies I can imagine, is, I think, a very straightforward, safe procedure. There's some small risks associated with it, but it's very unusual to have them. And I think when the patients see the whole process, which the video we did is in English and Spanish, and either segment can review the whole process, and I think they feel very comfortable when they see that it ends with a Band-Aid. In Spanish, we call that a curita, right? So it just ends with a little Band-Aid. And I think people realize, oh, this is not a major surgery. It's ending with a Band-Aid, right? So, I think people just seeing the whole process, and especially in whatever language they speak, it just helps a lot, right?
Is there And there are also shorter needles now that are available. I've had 6 liver biopsies, and so starting from back in the day and having so many, they would just sort of draw an X where everybody else had gone, and then lay on your side for 6 hours so you don't bleed out. It was always sort of disconcerting to me, and so I've been really excited to see the evolution of non-invasive diagnostics. And I know that some of our partners, as in the Liver Action Network, have and some programs that we have funded of taking screenings to plazas in Texas, and a location set up next to the Mexican embassy, and just say everybody can come and get a fiber scan, get a non-invasive test. Do you think that there is an opportunity with the evolution of non-invasive diagnostics to increase the number and diversity of people and types of patients who would be willing to participate in NASH clinical research?
I think so. We're a little reliant on the FDA right now about the need for biopsy in many of the clinical trials that we're performing for fatty liver disease. But these surrogate endpoints that you mentioned are very exciting. And we're seeing, for instance, some clinical trials in late phase trying to establish good endpoints that are not liver biopsies, which I think is very important and exciting. Because realistically, when new therapies come to market, many folks won't get a liver biopsy because there's no access to liver biopsy. I mean, we saw that with the hepatitis C era, that there's little access to many things that are needed in patients who need the therapy. So we could expect the same thing for fatty liver disease. I operated a hepatitis C treatment center in South Texas where, you could barely get an ultrasound, let alone a fiber scan, right? So, but we could calculate a FIB4, and we could send off a FiberSure. We could send off different non-invasive tests that gave us guidance about who this patient might be with regards to the severity of their liver disease. And we need to be able to do that for fatty liver disease too. And I think that it will be of great benefit if the clinical trials give us information about how to do that in the real world.
It seems to me that if we can have a clear understanding of which diagnostic is useful for what, whether initial diagnosis or staging or treatment response, then there can be a place and perhaps a greater comfort level in practice and certainly in research for the different diagnostics. But the number one message I hear from primary care doctors, as I'm trying to encourage them to become interested in screening and treating patients with fatty liver disease, is how can we make it simple? How can we make it work in the clinical workflow? Is there one test? If so, which one? Or if it's more than one test, how do we use them? And we need to be more clear about that. And so I'm excited about the evidence evolving, but certainly from a patient perspective, as I've been on record saying, I'm like, I could take all of them in the time that I'm laying there after a liver biopsy, and we can get all the information, and it costs less money too. And so I think the patients, certainly at our patient-focused drug development meeting, we're very clear about the preference for non-invasive diagnostics. And so whatever.
And it's going to become better, because what we're planning on doing now is these sequential testing, right? So you would start off with, say, something very simple like a FIB4, and then you move into something, more exciting like maybe a FibroScan. And then if that's where you had to end, you could end there, or you could maybe even add genetic testing and say, okay, so this person's, and you'll start, as we get more information, we'll be able to triangulate. And at the liver meeting, this is getting so complicated that they are assigning robots to do it, right? So the artificial intelligence comes in, and the program learning. So it's becoming more challenging, but I think it's on the horizon for sure.
Well, I think so. And I think, rather than thinking about the fancy robots making it more complex, if we can use AI or EHR cascades to make it easier for people and take off some of that either, cognitive load or what have you. Hopefully it would make it easy to treat patients. But I want to end on perhaps for someone of Hispanic descent listening to this today who may be overweight or have diabetes or already be on a cholesterol medication. What should they do after this? What should they be doing this afternoon after this episode? Who should they be calling, and what should they be asking for?
Well, I'll tell you who I'm inspired by. I'm inspired by Dean Ornish, and I like to talk to my patients about their approach to fatty liver disease in a way that he talks to his patients about cardiovascular disease and how to make our recovery from that. And so there's some really key parts of it. Number one, what he's found and what I've found is you need a community. This is one thing I really love about the PNPLA3. I try to drill down with my patients. This is not your condition. This is children's condition. This is your grandchildren's condition. This is your family, your sisters, your brothers. All of you have this disease. So you're going to all approach it together. Nobody's going to do this in isolation, right? And that makes the next two things interesting, right? Which is diet, because you need buy-in from the family about dietary changes, right? And we in my family made a big change at just a little bit before the pandemic, which is we went plant-based. And we went way over here, right? So we completely experimented with removing anything that wasn't a plant from our diet. And of course, it became a little bit more challenging to do during the pandemic because, different things were not available, but it grounded us essentially where it used to be, a protein like this, and then a small portion of vegetable here and a small portion of vegetable here. And now we ended with, the vegetable or plant-based material like this, and then maybe from time to time a small amount of protein over here. So I like to try to shift my patient's diet more towards plant-based and then try to encourage caloric control. I want something sustainable though, And I also give our Latinos special education. I mean, here in San Diego, a taco has two tortillas, right? Because that first one, he gets a little soggy from time to time. So there's always that second one to keep you in good stead, right? So, we need to educate our Latino patients that, those items can exacerbate metabolic conditions.
Right.
And then
it's actually you say that because whenever I come to San Diego, it is a tour of fish tacos, but I do sort of take the second tortilla off and just eat the one. One keeps it safe, but then I only eat the one. So it's funny that you say that because I do that.
And then we try to teach our patients about exercise and, and trying to make this all sustainable through a kind of new inner peace that they can maybe achieve through things like meditation or praying. So it's a holistic approach. And every once in a while, Donna, this gem of a patient comes to see me and they take all this information and they run with it and they do great. Right. And I've seen that from time to time, but it's not for everybody. I mean, so that's why, of course, we need medications. And, we need doctors who have time to talk to their patients about this, or people who can help coach folks through this. And, as we compare the cost of a drug that's going to maybe cost $60,000 to $100,000 a year, it's like, well, what if we paid for, a life coach to come spend, a day with this person a week at a much lower cost? I mean, we'd probably see some pretty dramatic results too. So, I think, there's different approaches here. We need medicines, but I think we also need lifestyle interventions that are meaningful and maybe even culturally specific.
Absolutely. I think even once a drug is approved with a specific NASH indication in the US, we will still need to have tailored lifestyle interventions and help people access, sort of all the parts of care that they need, whether it's a registered dietitian or a coach or access to weight loss medications or bariatric surgery or, or a personal trainer, or, what are all the parts that would need, or, a behavioral health specialist if you had a, a rocky relationship with food, in the past. So I think that, money spent there in putting together that type of, personalized but comprehensive, more holistic care, plan for patients is money well spent, both at the individual level and at the public health level as well. So we've agreed on something. So I think we have a plan. And I've enjoyed this conversation. I enjoy the work that we will be doing together, because I have no doubt we will be. The papers that you mentioned will be in the show notes, so everybody listening will be sharing some of the literature that's available. And we hope that this has been helpful. It's certainly been a great way for me to start the year being with you.
Thank you so much, Donna. You're a true inspiration, and please keep doing the good work you do.
Thank you. Till next
Please
time.
be sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. Join us weekly on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time for more episodes of GLI Live. Check out our website, globalliver.org, and follow us on social media to learn more about the Global Liver Institute and stay up to date with the latest in liver health. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay connected.